Hi. This week I'm in Japan, so I figured this episode of YouTube Art School will be a special on anime art. Specifically, how to color anime hair, since that's been a question that I've seen often in the comments. How to go from this to this. So let's imagine you got to this point. You have a nice drawing and you're looking to splash some colors on here. Well, I'll take you through all of the steps to get this colored with that nice smooth anime style, and you'll see it's actually quite easy when you know the steps. So with the drawing done, the first step will be to block in the flat color to serve as a base for our coloring. It's not super important what color we select now, we're just going to use this as our base for our clipping masks later. And before I go any further, we gotta understand how the shading for anime hair is going to work here, since that's going to make all the difference. The hair will usually rest on a sphere-like surface, aka the head, so its shading should be kinda similar. But unlike a regular surface where you would get a round highlight at the point, closest to the light source, anime hair behaves more like an anisotropic surface, similar to like brushed metal. The effect is that any spot of light being reflected will instead be stretched out perpendicular to the direction of the texture of the hair. It sounds complicated, but basically, if the hair strand is going in this direction, well, the spot of light will be stretched out this way. I'll spare you the physics behind it, but a perfect sphere made out of anime hair would feature shading that looks kinda like this as a result, instead of this. So with our actual haircut here, things will look very similar. Considering we also have some sort of light coming from above, if this were a plastic or like a skin surface maybe, the highlight would land about here, at the point where the light source is pointing towards. And that is still true with anisotropic shading, but instead we'll stretch out the highlight and use that as an indication of where our final highlights are going to be for now. We'll get back to this and add details later. Here I'm using a clipping mask like all the Japanese artists that I studied also use. So if I were to create another one for the shadows, let's say like right above my hair base layer here, I'll create a new layer and immediately change that layer into a clipping mask by clicking here in Photoshop. And in Clip Studio Paint, it's similar, but the option is found here. Clip to layer below, and you'll be able to tell that it's a clipping mask by the red bar that you have here. Now back to Photoshop. Clipping masks are nice because they limit the area you can paint on based on the first normal layer directly underneath. So for my hair here, you can see that the paint is only applied to where I painted the base color. So let's actually move on to the shadows. We'll have overall shadows and cast shadows, so two types in total. Using the shadow clipping mask that I just created, I'll grab a soft brush, and if I'm happy with my base hair color, I'll just go ahead and select a slightly darker version of the same color and loosely paint that over the tip of the hair strand so we get some color gradients in there rather than all the same flat color. It looks way better. And then for the cast shadows, I'll actually create a new clipping mask to keep things clean and with a slightly darker color. We can add some brush strokes using a harder brush if some strands of hair look like they might be behind others and not receiving as much light as a result. And if we get some loose strands like this too, well, they might be blocking the light from reaching the hair below, so we can add a little shadow. It's not a huge step, but it does add quite a bit of depth. And now the remaining steps should really make this pop, because it doesn't quite just yet. But first, an important reminder that the sale for my art program is ending at the end of the month, so there's still a few days left to get the best art education around at a massive discount to celebrate reaching 24,000 registered students. As a student, you also get access to our private Discord community of artists to get some company and support as you level up your art skills. Check out the link in the video description for all the info, and don't hesitate to shoot me a DM on QBrush, if you have any questions. Don't miss out, the big sale is ending soon. Alright, plug over. Now let's get to the most rewarding part, the highlights. We already know where those are going to be, but we still have to render them properly, because this looks like crap. So what I like to do is start from what we have here and add some fuzziness to the outlines using a hard brush. The brush strokes are not random, of course, we're kind of following the line art we already have to make sure that it all flows in the same direction. Obviously, you can make those details more or less intricate, depending on your style. I like medium details, personally. And then the highlight color will typically be a much lighter version of the base color. And it's also very important that we erase some of the highlights around the line art, since, well, those lines basically represent gaps in between the hair strands. There we go, now that's starting to look pretty good, but we're missing 4 special steps to call it done. The first one will be to add a darker halo around our highlights. In Photoshop, we can do this easily by using an outer glow layer style. It helps to make those highlights pop a lot more. But we could also just paint it manually, like using a layer below the highlights with a soft brush if you don't use Photoshop. The next special step is to color pick the skin color of our character and softly paint over the tip of the bangs if the character has any, of course. Now this is a stylized way to make the bangs seem somewhat transparent, or just not as dense as the other area, we can see the skin through it, So moving on, the third special step will be to color our line art. First, I'll make sure to lock the alpha for the lines, and then using a darker version of the hair color, a slightly darker color than the darkest shadow usually works best so we can see it. And we can just paint over all of the lines outlining the hair strands, just like that, and I think that looks a lot better than just black lines. Right? That's a fact. And then finally, the last step will be to add a strong directional light to add some color contrast to our coloring. This could be the highlight, coming from the sun, maybe just an ambient light coming from the sky, a bounce light maybe from a nearby object like a wall, or the ground. Either way, it always looks better when it's a complementary color to the base hair color. So if I have blue hair, a nice light yellow highlight would probably work great. Or if I have a reddish hair like my character here, a cooler color might work better to offset its warmth and bring balance. Obviously, if a character is part of a scene with its own lighting, then you'll want to consider using that instead. Now, I'll paint this on another clipping mask, and I like to add a bit of outer glow here as well. Just a lighter color this time, set to hard light to make the light source seem a little bit more intense. I really love the colored transition that it creates, between the highlights and the base hair color. It adds a little bit of subsurface scattering effect. And well, this should wrap it up. So to recap real quick, we start with a base color as the foundation for all of our clipping masks. Then we'll block in the anisotropic highlights. Then add the soft shadows and the cast shadows. From there we move on to the highlight details, adding a darker soft halo around it to make it pop, before lighting up the bangs, if any, coloring the line art, and adding the final directional highlight. That's how the pros do it, and now you know how. I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments, will you? And then since you've been a good student, you can also go ahead and grab my custom brush set full of my favorite brushes for absolutely free with the link in the video description. My custom ink brush that I used for today's drawing is included in my advanced painter set, so you can also find a link for that down below. And then, what the heck, more freebies. You can also download some of my drawings included in my free exercise files if you want to test this coloring method and you don't have a drawing of yours on hand. How amazing. Alright, I'll see you next week.